Back in the 1950s, when jukeboxes ruled and drive-ins were the weekend thrill, GM was already stamping its name in history with cars that packed serious muscle. These 12 rides weren't just about chrome and curves. They had raw power that made everyone stop and stare. Number 12, Chevrolet Bel Air, 1957. Here comes a machine that could make anyone in the 1950s stop in their tracks. The Chevrolet Bel Air of 1957. This car was not just another pretty face on the road. It had power packed right under its long, shiny hood. And that is exactly what makes it stand tall in the lineup of the most powerful GM muscle cars of that decade. The moment people saw those famous tail fins and the sparkle of chrome, they knew something exciting was about to happen. But the real thrill began when the engine came alive. Now, let us get to the part that gave this car its muscle. Chevrolet gave the Bel Air a 280 cubic inch V8 engine, and even the standard setup was no joke, offering around 220 horsepower at 4,800 revolutions per minute. That much strength in the 50s was enough to make your neighbor's jaw drop and make kids cheer as it flew past them on the street. Yet for those who wanted to go beyond normal, there was the famous ramjet fuel injection system. With that option, the horsepower jumped to a mind-blowing 283, making it pound for pound one of the toughest rides of its time. But the fun did not stop at just raw strength. Another thing that made the Bel Air stand apart was how many choices it gave to drivers. You could go with a simple 3-speed manual transmission if you wanted full control, or pick one of the new automatics like the Power Glide, or the smoother Turbo Glide that shifted almost without you noticing. For car lovers of that age, it felt like a sneak peek into the future. And with that strong motor paired to the rear-wheel drive layout, the Bel Air had the punch to reach speeds up to 120 miles per hour, which was a thrill very few cars of the 50s could match. Switching gears from speed to style, the Bel Air was more than just a muscle car. It was a statement. Chevrolet added bold touches like anodized gold trim across the grille, fenders, and scripts, which gave the car the look of pure confidence. Tail fins stretched out to make the rear look wide and commanding. And right under the headlights were torpedo-shaped accents in chrome that seemed to wink at anyone watching. No wonder people called it an icon of its time, putting it right alongside the biggest stars and television shows of that golden era. And just when you thought the magic was only outside, the cabin offered even more surprises. Drivers were treated to a big, easy-to-read speedometer, bright polished trim across the dash, and two-tone interiors that made the whole car feel like a celebration of color. Add in power windows, power seats, power steering, and even a signal-seeking radio. And suddenly, the Bel Air looked less like a regular family car and more like a rolling luxury lounge. For those who wanted both speed and comfort, the Chevrolet Bel Air was simply the perfect mix. Number 11, Pontiac Bonneville, 1958. And just when you thought the Chevy Bel Air was the only star of the 50s, the Pontiac Bonneville of 1958 blasted onto the scene like a rocket straight from a Saturday morning space show. This car was built for people who wanted muscle, style, and a big dose of futuristic flair, all rolled into one long, low cruiser that could stretch across half the block. To feel the punch of this machine, you only have to peek at its mighty heart. Under the hood sat a huge V8 engine with 300 horsepower at 4,800 revolutions per minute. That number alone in the late 50s was enough to make other cars shuffle quietly to the side. Torque came in at 400 pound-feet at 3,400 revolutions per minute, which meant the Bonneville could haul its big body down the road with muscle to spare. And if that was not enough, there was even a setup with triple two-barrel carburetors, known as tri-power, that gave it an even sharper kick. Moving from the raw muscle to the futuristic experiments, Pontiac packed this Bonneville with tricks never seen together before in Detroit cars. It offered mechanical fuel injection, a high-tech system that sprayed fuel directly into each cylinder port for smoother and stronger power delivery. On top of that, it came with air suspension, which replaced normal spring, with air bladders pumped up by a compressor, giving drivers the ability to adjust ride height with the turn of a knob. Sure, the system was fussy at times, but in 1958, it made the Bonneville feel like something out of science fiction, a car that was not afraid to try bold ideas. And then came the part that made people stare even before the key was turned. The Bonneville stretched more than 17 feet long, with wide shoulders, sharp lines, and chrome shining on nearly every surface. Dual headlights gave the front a confident glare, while twin tail lamps echoed at the back. connected by one of the flashiest bumpers ever bolted onto a car. Along the sides ran rocket-style trim, complete with little chrome bursts like shockwaves, making it look as if the car was already flying at supersonic speed, even when parked. It was not just a car, it was a rolling statement that America was charging into the space age with style. Opening the big door revealed a dash that looked more like a show car than a regular production ride. Chrome circles, chrome bullets, and chrome accents ran across the cabin like jewelry, and even the gadgets were ahead of their time. There was a radio you could pull out and carry to the beach, a power seat that remembered your favorite position, and even sun visors that slid on rails. Sitting behind the huge steering wheel, you felt like a pilot ready for takeoff, with power waiting to be unleashed at a moment's notice. Number 10. Oldsmobile 88, 1955. And speaking of cars that made people stare with wide eyes, let's jump right into the Oldsmobile 88 from 1955. A machine that carried power in its veins and style on every panel. This car was not just another set of wheels. It was one of those rides that could make you smile even before you turned the key, because you knew something special was waiting under the hood. What really gave this car its punch was the 324 cubic inch Rocket V8, a motor that was born out of racing dreams and built to make the streets come alive. With 250 horsepower flowing through it, this engine did not whisper politely. It shouted in a way that made drivers grip the wheel just a little tighter. And paired with an automatic hydromatic transmission, the 88 made sure the power got down to the pavement smoothly enough that even your grandma could take it for a spin. Though you probably would not want her testing those Flowmaster pipes. Now, the way this car handled the road was no less impressive. Oldsmobile engineers had given it a chassis that was rebuilt and reinforced, making every cruise feel controlled rather than clumsy. Power steering meant you did not need the arms of a lumberjack to corner, and power brakes gave you confidence to bring all that muscle to a stop without breaking a sweat. The suspension, complete with fresh shocks and springs, made the ride not only powerful but also steady, like the car was gliding yet still reminding you of its strength with every press of the throttle. As we move from the mechanics to the looks, the Oldsmobile 88 made sure no one would mistake it for anything ordinary. Painted in polar white over Panama blue, it looked like a rolling piece of American pride, trimmed with chrome so polished you could practically check your hair in it. Fender skirts tucked neatly over the wide white wall tires gave the car a sense of motion even while parked, and those tri-bar wheel covers spun like jewelry in motion whenever the car rolled down Main Street. And if you thought the outside was bold, the cabin doubled down on that sense of charm. Sliding into the blue fabric and white vinyl seats felt like stepping into a movie set from the golden age, with gauges that still worked to remind you this car was as much about function as it was about flair. Even the trunk was fully carpeted, showing how much care went into making this car not just powerful, but complete in every way. Number 9. Buick Roadmaster, 1956. And just when you thought the Oldsmobile had given us all the thrills, the 1956 Buick Roadmaster rolled in like a heavyweight champ wearing a tuxedo. This was Buick's top ride of the decade, and it proved that luxury could still throw a knockout punch in the horsepower ring. If you ever wondered what a car that mixed muscle with manners looked like, the Roadmaster was the answer rolling down the boulevard. Moving first to what gave this car its proud swagger, the Fireball V8 under the hood was a big reason. With 322 cubic inches of pure nailhead design, it gave 255 horsepower, and that was no small number back in 1956. This kind of muscle could push a car that was nearly 18 feet long without breaking a sweat, and drivers could feel every bit of that torque when the light turned green. The nailhead had a reputation for toughness, which is why hot rodders loved it, but in the Roadmaster it came tuned for both strength and smoothness, the perfect blend for power cruising. And once that power was there, Buick made sure it moved in style. The Dynaflow automatic transmission was unlike anything else, gliding through shifts like melted butter on hot cornbread. It was not about snapping your neck, it was about keeping you floating while the speed kept climbing. Add in power steering and power brakes, and suddenly, a car this big felt as easy to handle as your neighbor's lawnmower, though with a lot more chrome shining in the sun. Talk about shine. The Roadmaster knew how to make an entrance before the engine even started. That massive chrome grille looked like it could swallow lesser cars whole, and the famous 4 venti ports on each fender told everyone this was the king of the Buick lineup. The bumpers were so wide and bright that you might joke they could double as mirrors at the drive-in. And if that was not enough, the body line swept back with confidence. giving the Roadmaster the look of a car that had already won the race before leaving the driveway. But wait until you hear about the interior, because Buick didn't stop at muscle and looks. The cabin was a playground of comfort, with foam seats wrapped in rich fabric and vinyl, power windows that rolled down with the push of a button, and a padded dash that looked futuristic for its time. Even the horn was special. It had 4 notes that played together like a chord. So instead of a honk, you got a little symphony every time you nudged the button. Imagine pulling up behind someone and giving them not just a beep, but an actual Buick concert. Number 8, 1959 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz. Now that the Roadmaster has flexed its muscles, let us roll the film forward to 1959, where Cadillac went for pure shock and awe with the Eldorado Biarritz. If the 50s were about living big, this Cadillac was the proof written in steel, chrome, and horsepower. The most unforgettable thing that grabs your eyes first are those massive tail fins. They did not just point to the sky, they nearly touched it. Each fin carried rocket-style taillights that looked ready to launch the car into orbit. Designers were clearly inspired by jet planes and bombers, giving the Biarritz an air of power before the key even turned. It was as if Cadillac said, why build a car that just drives when you can build one that looks like it belongs on a runway? But good looks mean nothing without muscle, and this machine had plenty of that. Beneath the long hood sat a 390 cubic inch V8, fitted with 3 two-barrel carburetors, a setup proudly called Tri-Power. Together, they produced 345 horsepower, a number so strong for its day that smaller cars practically trembled when they pulled up next to it at a red light. That much energy meant the Biarritz could glide down the highway with unstoppable confidence, all while carrying a full load of passengers who never once broke a sweat. To make sure all that strength translated into a smooth ride, Cadillac gave this car air suspension, an advanced setup for its time. Drivers could float across bumpy streets as if the pavement had turned to silk. Combined with power steering and power brakes, piloting this massive machine felt easier than parking a bicycle. It was a car that proved you could have muscle without giving up comfort, and that balance made it legendary. Of course, Cadillac did not stop there. They packed the Biarritz with gadgets that made it feel years ahead. Imagine headlights that dimmed themselves when another car approached, or windows that rolled down with a gentle press of a switch, or even a 6-way power seat that could adjust in more directions than most living room recliners. These touches turned every drive into an event, where you felt like both the driver and the honored guest. And then came the color choices and chrome trim, which made every example of the Biarritz stand out like a jewel on wheels. With over 17 feet of body stretched from nose to tail, the car carried enough shine to light up an entire city block. Neighbors did not just watch it pass by, they stopped, stared, and wondered how a car could look that powerful, that extravagant, and that unforgettable all at the same time. Number 7, Chevrolet Corvette, 1953. Now, if you thought the Cadillac Eldorado was dramatic, wait until you hear about the Chevrolet Corvette from 1953. This was the car that showed America it could make a true sports machine, not just big cruisers, and it quickly earned its spot among the most powerful GM creations of the decade. The magic began with what you saw first, a low body made from fiberglass. This was not just for looks, it made the car light, and when you take away weight, you unlock speed. Back in the 50s, most cars were built with heavy steel. But here came a machine wearing a new skin that was strong and light at the same time. That clever idea made the Corvette special even before anyone turned the key. Now, speaking of turning the key, the power waiting under that long hood was called the Blue Flame engine. It was a 6-cylinder with 235 cubic inches, fed by 3 carburetors, and it pushed out 150 horsepower. That may not sound like today's muscle monsters, but in 1953 it gave this little 2-seater plenty of fire to surprise anyone who thought it was only about looks. The dual exhaust gave it a voice that told everyone nearby it meant business. Moving to the frame and handling, this car had an X-shaped box girder design that held everything firm, while the suspension borrowed proven parts to keep things balanced. The front carried knee action with stabilizers, while the back had 4-leaf springs, making it stay planted even when drivers pushed it hard. The steering felt sharp for its time, letting drivers actually play with curves instead of just rolling along straights. The Corvette was not only about muscles, it also looked like nothing else on the road. The headlights sat neatly into the fenders, the grille had a wide, toothy smile, and the tail carried rocket-style lamps that looked like sparks ready to fly. Even the top was a rakish fabric cover, giving the car a sporting flavor at all times. To add a touch of flash, every model came in polo white paint with a sportsman red cockpit, a combo that looked alive day or night. When you opened the cabin, you were greeted with bucket seats built for two, a tachometer right in front of the driver, and a nearly vertical steering wheel that felt like something from a fighter plane. Every part whispered speed and fun, and though the options were only a heater and a radio, that stripped-down approach made it even purer. This was America's first true sports car, and it carried the raw energy to prove it. Number 6. Pontiac Chieftain, 1952. And rolling straight from the Corvette's fiberglass flash, here comes a machine that wore its power with a big smile of chrome, the 1952 Pontiac Chieftain. What really gave this car its punch was the straight-8 engine with 268 cubic inches, delivering 122 horsepower. For the early 50s, that number was impressive, and it gave the Chieftain the kind of push that made highways feel smaller. Even better, drivers could choose the dual-range hydromatic transmission, which let them pick between smooth cruising or quicker acceleration depending on the road. That sort of flexibility was rare back then, and it gave the Pontiac an edge over many competitors. Now let's shift the focus to design, because the Chieftain did not just move well, it looked like authority rolling down the street. The grille stretched wide with bold bars, the bumpers carried tall chrome guards, and the hood wore a glowing ornament shaped like a proud chieftain's head. This detail alone made people stop and stare, and at night it lit up, like a crown leading the way forward. Every angle of the car showed off confidence, from the long fenders to the wide stance. Moving along to comfort, Pontiac made sure this car was more than muscle. The cabin offered space for families or friends, and with the station wagon model, you could even carry 8 passengers or haul serious cargo by folding down seats. That blend of power and practicality meant you could race down the road, then head straight to the drive-in with everyone piled in without missing a beat. Next up is how it handled. The suspension soaked up bumps with a calmness that made road trips feel easy, while the brakes, big hydraulic drums, gave stopping power to match the speed. Even at 65 miles per hour, conversations stayed calm because the Chieftain glided instead of shaking. That quiet strength showed it was not only fast, but also refined enough for long drives. The tires added their own flair too, with wide white walls giving the car a classy touch, while a metal sun visor stretched across the windshield, adding personality and shade. Every piece of trim, every line of chrome, worked together to make the Chieftain both stylish and strong. And tucked beneath all the shine was a machine built to last. Simple enough to fix, yet powerful enough to thrill. It was a true expression of what GM muscle meant in the early 50s. A car that had both brawn and presence, wrapped in chrome and attitude. Number 5. Buick Century, 1955. And if you thought the Pontiac had flair, wait until the spotlight swings toward the 1955 Buick Century, a car that strutted into the scene with a grin of chrome and a punch under the hood that made jaws drop. Known back then as the banker's hot rod, this ride proved you could have fancy looks and serious speed at the very same time, which is exactly why it's counted among the most powerful GM muscle cars of the 1950s. Now here's the part that made the Century such a legend. Buick squeezed the big Roadmaster V8 engine into the smaller special body, and what rolled out was pure lightning on 4 wheels. The 322 cubic inch nailhead V8 brought 236 horsepower, and that was a big deal when most family cars barely managed half of that. Suddenly, cruising at 100 miles per hour was not a dream. It was the reason for the Century's very name. But the Century was not only about the raw numbers, it also brought style that could stop traffic on Main Street. Those famous 4 portholes on each side of the fenders weren't just decoration. They were Buick's way of saying, yes, this one is faster. Add in the wide grin of a grille, the heavy bumpers, and paint schemes that came in 2 colors, split across the body, and you had a car that looked as confident as it felt. Let's not forget the driving feel, because Buick had a trick up its sleeve with the Dynaflow automatic transmission. While other cars were jerking through gear changes, the Century just slid forward smoothly, letting that big V8 hum with ease. And when you pressed your foot down, the car surged forward so strongly that passengers usually ended up laughing nervously and grabbing the seat. Shift the focus for a moment to comfort, because the Century made sure power did not come at the cost of luxury. Plush wide seats wrapped passengers in soft fabrics, Chrome trim sparkled across the dash, and gadgets like the push-button radio made the car feel futuristic for the time. Even power steering and power brakes were available, giving drivers more control and less arm wrestling with the wheel. And then there's the cool fact that sealed its status. The 1955 Buick Century was chosen as the pace car for the Indianapolis 500. Imagine a car that families drove to church on Sunday, also leading race cars at America's biggest speed event. That is the kind of versatility and power mix that made people look twice. Number 4. Chevrolet 210-1956. Now it's turn to meet a Chevrolet that carried just as much attitude, the 1956 Chevrolet 210. This car might have been labeled as the mid-range Chevy of its day, but one look under the hood and you'll understand why it is remembered as a powerhouse in the muscle story of the 50s. First thing that grabs your attention is the engine menu Chevy offered. Buyers could go simple with a 6-cylinder, but the real magic came with the small block V8. The 265 cubic inch motor could be ordered in several high-power versions, and when tuned right, it made the car quick enough to embarrass bigger machines. That power was delivered through choices of a 3-speed manual, a 3-speed with overdrive, or the smooth 2-speed Powerglide automatic, giving drivers the ability to pick the thrill level they wanted. But the 210 was not just muscle stuffed into metal, it had a design that gave it confidence on every street corner. A wide chrome grille stretched across the front like a shiny smile, while the body carried sharp trim lines that pointed the car forward, as if it were already moving fast. Two-tone paint jobs added flair, with color splits that made the car look longer and lower. And if you caught the sunlight just right, the stainless trim would flash like jewelry. Now, let's slide to the cabin, because Chevrolet did not forget comfort. Bench seats covered in vinyl and fabric gave families space, while the dashboard carried a dual pod design that looked futuristic for its day. A big steering wheel, polished trim, and a lineup of gauges gave drivers the feeling that they were piloting something modern and bold. Even with all that style, the 210 stayed practical, proving you could mix muscle with everyday use. What makes this car even more exciting is how well it could handle upgrades. Some examples were later rebuilt with larger motors, like a 350 cubic inch LS 6V8, pushing well over 400 horsepower. With modern suspension and brakes fitted in, the 210 transformed into a muscle car that could keep up with performance cars from decades ahead, all while keeping its classic 50s charm. And here's the part that car fans love. The 210 carried the same bones as the top-level Bel Air, but kept its own character. It was not about showing off. It was about going fast while looking sharp. Number 3. Cadillac Series 62, 1951. Now, here comes Cadillac to remind everyone who really wears the crown, the 1951 Cadillac Series 62. What makes this Cadillac special starts with the size and stance. It sat on a 126-inch wheelbase, giving it a long, commanding look. The designers stretched the hood and dropped the body lower to the ground, while chrome trim ran the full length of the rocker panels and wrapped around the fender skirts. Even the grille got a bold new design in 1951, with shiny egg crate extensions beneath the headlights and a massive V emblem sitting proudly at the front. Of course, Cadillac knew beauty needed brains, and that is where the powerful heart comes in. Underneath that long hood rested the mighty 331 cubic inch V8 engine, an engineering marvel that delivered strong, reliable power. Paired with the smooth, hydromatic automatic transmission, it gave drivers a mix of muscle and comfort that few cars could match in the early 50s. That is why the Series 62 earned its reputation as a muscle car, dressed in a tuxedo, fast enough to thrill, refined enough to impress. The story does not stop at the motor, because Cadillac made sure the driver felt like a captain. Slide behind the wheel, and you would see a brand new 2-spoke steering wheel, bright striated metal inserts across the dash, and gauges laid out in a wide inverted U design. The controls felt modern, almost futuristic for the time, and the clever touches kept piling on. Doors that opened with the push of a button, crank-out vent windows, and even a clever gas filler hidden behind the taillight door. Every detail was proof that Cadillac wanted to lead, not follow. Now here's where things get even more impressive. This car was not just about show, it delivered in numbers. In 1951 alone, Cadillac sold over 81,000 Series 62 models, making up more than 70% of the company's total sales. That kind of success does not happen by accident. It happens because people felt the mix of style, strength, and innovation was unbeatable. Add in upgrades like fog lights, automatic heat control, and a factory push-button radio, and you had a car that felt decades ahead of its rivals. Number 2, Pontiac Starchief, 1954. Now, you might be wondering that Cadillac was the final word in muscle mixed with style. Let me surprise you with Pontiac's big move in 1954, the mighty Starchief. This was not just another car thrown into the lineup. This was Pontiac stretching its arms and saying, "I am here to play with the big boys of GM." What jumps out first is the size. The Starchief carried a wheelbase of 124 inches, longer than the Chieftain, and stretched over 213 inches in total length. That meant when you parked this Pontiac, you needed plenty of room. And when you pulled up anywhere, people noticed. 3 bright chrome stars sat proudly on the rear fenders, like badges of honor announcing that this was no ordinary Pontiac. But design alone is never enough. So let's talk about what really made it a contender in the world of power. Pontiac gave the Starchief its top motor, the 268 cubic inch straight 8. With 127 horsepower, when paired with the Hydra-matic automatic transmission, this car was not shy about moving its long frame down the road. That smooth surge of strength made it feel commanding, especially compared to smaller competitors still struggling with less power. Now, let's shift to what it felt like to ride in one. Open the door and you were greeted by a cabin full of choices. Buyers could pick all leather seating or a mix of leather and nylon that looked rich and felt modern. Chrome trim lined the dashboard and the controls were laid out with a driver-focused sense of purpose. Even small touches like the illuminated hood ornament out front and the push-button radio made you realize this car was trying to impress at every angle. Pontiac was clever with timing too, because 1954 was also the year they showed off air conditioning that tucked all the hardware neatly under the hood, a first for cars in its price class. Imagine that, a big cruiser with the cool air flowing, years before most of your neighbors even knew such a thing was possible. Add in white wall tires, rear fender skirts, and polished wheel covers, and suddenly the Starchief looked ready for parades and boulevards alike. And here's a fun fact that builds even more curiosity. The Starchief was picked as the pace car for the Indianapolis 500 in 1954. That meant when America's fastest race was run, this Pontiac was the official machine leading the way. Number 1, 1957 Oldsmobile Starfire Series, 98. In the end, Oldsmobile had its own ace waiting to strike, the 1957 Oldsmobile Starfire 98. Right under that long hood sat the mighty 300 horsepower J2 Rocket Viv 8, a 371 cubic inch monster with not 1, not 2, but 3 carburetors ready to feed it air and fuel. Most of the time, only the center carburetor worked, keeping things calm for everyday driving. But press the pedal all the way down, and the other 2 joined in, turning this Oldsmobile into a rocket on wheels. That clever system gave it torque numbers over 470 foot-pounds, enough to make its wide white wall tires dig into the pavement with authority. Of course, brute force was only part of the story, because this car came wrapped in one of the most stylish designs of the decade. Gold mist metallic paint flowed over broad steel panels, trimmed with festival red stripes tucked neatly in the chrome. At the back, bold tail lamps with TriStar inserts gleamed, while jet plane ornaments perched proudly on the quarters. This was the space age brought to your driveway, complete with wraparound glass and a roofline that leaned toward fastback drama. Swing open the door and the interior continued the theme of high-class muscle. Two-tone saddle leather paired with broadcloth inserts, and even metallic threads were woven into the fabric, catching the light just enough to remind you that this was a luxury machine as well as a powerhouse. The dashboard glittered with polished knobs, an oval speedometer, and a chrome band stretching across, almost like a control panel of a jet. Add in power windows, power steering, and even air conditioning, and suddenly you had performance without giving up comfort. Underneath, Oldsmobile engineers kept it strong and steady, with independent coil springs up front, leaf springs at the rear, and 4-wheel power drum brakes to tame all that rocket energy. Paired with the Jetaway Hydra-matic 4-speed automatic, it could cruise smoothly or unleash its full fury at a moment's notice. And here's the detail that cements its legend. The very same J2 engine hit nearly 145 miles per hour at Daytona Beach during Speed Week, before racing officials banned it for being too powerful. That tells you everything you need to know. The Starfire 98 wasn't just another pretty car from the 50s. It was a muscle car hiding in plain sight, waiting to remind everyone that Oldsmobile meant speed. So, which of these 50s muscle legends would you love to park in your driveway? Drop your pick in the comments, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more classic car stories.